Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. We have a problem. A chorus of critics on the left, my side of things, are calling for Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Google to police their content. In other words, those critics are calling on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Google to become censors. But I believe we should call on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube not to act as censors. Let's face it, often the material us lefties want censored contains political views that clash with our own. But these are the very sort of views that democracy and freedom of speech are supposed to protect. I believe we should have unfettered freedom of speech, in the tradition of Voltaire's line that I disagree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Yet Twitter permanently banned Donald Trump on January 8th, 2 days after his January 6th insurrection. And Amazon shut down Parler. These proved to be necessary moves. Why? Trump followers announced that the riot of the 6th was just the opening battle in a much bigger war and talked of a far more violent event on January 20th, the day of Joe Biden's inauguration. They promised the assault of the 20th would keep Donald Trump in power for at least another 4 years. And some declared that what they called liberal democratic traitors would be executed. So why is censorship bad 99.9% of the time, but necessary the other 0.1%? Here's a stab at an answer. But first let me read you an email that was provoked by the Twitter banning of Trump and the shutdown of Parler. It's from the right-wing source DC Swamp Watch. The headline reads, "Warning, conservatives are being wiped out." And the body of the email says, "Take action. This could be the last patriot email you ever receive before the censorship apocalypse wipes us out." Yes, Swamp Watch says there is a censorship apocalypse. Fellow American, DC Swamp Watch goes on, quote, "Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube, and other big tech monopolies just went on a mass purge massacre against conservatives. President Trump has been permanently banned across major social media platforms." Think about that. The leader of the free world has been silenced in a single instant. If this attack on conservative voices isn't ground to a halt this instant, we, the people, can and will expose you and knock you out from power. This is your final warning. And Scott Lively, president of Abiding Truth Ministries, an anti-gay Christian group, warns in the right-wing news site WND that we are under the jackboots of, quote, "new Nazi overlords," close quote, and we are on, quote, "a rapid descent into tyranny which will sooner or later phase into the great tribulation of end-time prophecy." In many ways, these warnings are untrue. Conservative speech isn't being shut down in a censorship apocalypse, nor is this some sort of media massacre. The mailing I just read you was not the last email DC Swamp Watch would ever send out. Far from it. It was just one in a seemingly endless stream. And freedom for conservatives to speak was not being wiped out. The conservative media ecosystem in America is one of the richest media ecosystems in the world. It has Fox TV, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, the Washington Examiner, Newsmax, OAN, Breitbart, the Daily Caller, WND, and 42 others. Not to mention nearly all the talk radio in the USA. But yes, Trump was shut out of Twitter. And yes, Parler was shut out of Amazon. And yes, there are genuine calls for censorship, and they are coming from my side, from the left. For example, NPR says that when it comes to the insurrection of January 6th, quote, "a growing chorus advocates and lawmakers say tech companies bear some responsibility." But do the tech companies bear responsibility? I don't know about you, but I want the tech companies to be totally neutral about content. I want them to act like a telephone line. Telecom companies are in the business of giving you and me uncluttered access to anywhere and anything we want. They are not there to censor us and to correct our morals. In fact, they are not supposed to listen in at all. Asking Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to comb through your messages and mine and to bounce those that don't live up to a moral or political code is asking them to be thought police. And that's not what they are there for. They are there to allow you and me to communicate as honestly as we can. They are there to let us communicate for any purpose that pleases us, short of violent revolution and murder. And short of violence and murder is the meat of the matter. It's the dividing line between free speech and criminal speech. Here's what happens when we ask outlets like YouTube to be policemen. A few days ago, I was told I'd gotten a notice from YouTube about my episode called Coup. Google said that the script violated their community guidelines on violent criminal organizations and warned that with further infractions, I would be punished by lashes of the electronic whip, like not being able to upload new videos for a week. This was the specter of censorship come to life. The video went up on December 5th. 2020, 45 days before the inauguration of Joe Biden, and explained that military voices like General Michael Flynn and Lieutenant General Thomas McInerney were urging Donald Trump to declare martial law, to declare a state of emergency, to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, to suspend the election, to rerun the election under military control, meaning under Trump control, and most important, to keep Donald Trump in office. The Want to Know Why Ask How Coup video warned of things like the insurrection that Trump's fans would pull off on January 6th. It told vital truths, truths I was afraid the mainstream media wouldn't give you, and that I felt were vital to the continuation of this nation's democracy. After all, Donald Trump was doing his best to set himself up as dictator for life, and I tried my best to warn you of one way he might do it. Before January 20th, before the inauguration of Joe Biden, we couldn't be sure Joe Biden would ever be inaugurated at all. Should YouTube have the power to keep you from seeing this sort of information because an algorithm may have analyzed the words and mistakenly thought I might be calling for a coup, not warning of one? I don't think so. We have police forces of all kinds in this nation. They can look for criminal acts on the web and stop them. But this nation is dedicated to freedom of speech. Look, I've fought against censorship and have put my career on the line to carry out that fight. In 1968, I turned down 4 graduate school fellowships in neuroscience to do field work in mass behavior. I didn't want to speculate on myth-making from a perch in a university. I wanted to dive into the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. In 1976, I founded the biggest PR firm in the music industry and worked with people like Michael Jackson and Prince. Then in 1986, I co-founded a group called Music in Action to go toe-to-toe with Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, and a group of politically powerful Washington wives who wanted to censor music. Those wives tried to put me out of business. They sent a secret letter to the heads of the 6 biggest conglomerates in the record industry, asking them to get me out of their hair and, by implication, out of the music business entirely. Freedom of the press saved me. An unknown music business insider leaked the secret email, or that was actually snail mail in those days, from the witches of Washington to the Hollywood Reporter, and the Hollywood Reporter printed the Washington wives' attempt to shut me down as a giant headline at the top of its front page. That publishing of a secret correspondence gave the big 6 record companies cover in allowing me to continue running the Howard Bloom Organization, Ltd. Now let me repeat, freedom of the press saved me. So why do I hate it when folks on either the left or right attack Twitter, Facebook, and Google? Why do I not want these outlets to exercise censorship of any kind? Yet why do I think that bouncing Donald Trump from Twitter during the last weeks of his presidency was absolutely essential, because it stopped January 20th, the day of the inauguration, from becoming an even bigger insurrection than the one we saw on January 6th. It stopped America from becoming a dictatorship and a bloodbath. It stopped Donald Trump from pulling a coup and staying in the White House. So what crosses the line and what justifies censorship? How do we spot the 0.1% of freedom of speech that cannot be allowed? When I first read that Abraham Lincoln had shut down more than 300 newspapers during the Civil War, I was furious. How could a great man, a great president, and a man I admired profoundly be an anti-freedom of the press tyrant? Because of situations like the one in New York, where Lincoln ordered the military occupation of the New York World for behavior Lincoln deemed wicked and traitorous. New York City was a powder keg. It was filled with armed gangs of Irish immigrants. The Metropolitan Record urged those gangs in 1863 to armed resistance against the draft. In the resulting riots, those gangs killed more than 100 blacks in lynchings, beatings, and hackings. And they burned down black businesses and institutions like an orphanage with 233 kids. While the nation needed to train its military force on defeating the South, not on quelling a rebellion in Manhattan. Twitter pulled an Abe Lincoln on Trump. Trump had built a powder keg and was in the process of lighting the fuse when Twitter shut him down. So yes, it's crucial for you and me to defend freedom of speech to the hilt. It's vital for you and me to stop attacks on the so-called tech tyrants, whether those attacks come from the left or from the right. It's vital to use censorship only when lives are at stake and when real-world violence is in the offing. Violence that muzzling a tiny slice of speech can prevent. Meanwhile, the so-called tech tyrants are anything but. Twitter, Facebook, and Google give you and me tools previous generations could not have imagined. They give us whole new kinds of freedoms. Leave them be. Let them be neutral, like phone companies. Ask them to shut down freedom of speech only in Abraham Lincoln moments. Moments when lives or our democracy are at stake. This is Howard Bloom, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make, or, want to know why, ask how. And now for the sleazy, slimy, seditious, rebellious little off button.